could you tell us a bit more about where the idea for the Global Center started and why Newmont wants to invest in this area of social performance?
Newmont has a long history of relationships and agreements with Indigenous communities that range from the US all the way to Australia. And I think we also realize that the mining industry can and needs to do a much better job respecting and promoting Indigenous communities and their rights as it relates to extractive industries. And at Newmont, we certainly know that we can improve our practices and the approaches that we use, and we're committed to do that. When the Goldcorp acquisition came along in 2019, the number of operations that we had, which were located on Indigenous lands and territories, increased dramatically. Likewise, we clearly recognize that the relationships and agreements that were in place with the First Nations communities throughout Canada were critically important to our ability to operate, but also offered us an opportunity to learn across an even larger geography. And Newmont then made a commitment to Investment Canada, which became the catalyst to create a new way of thinking, a new approach to how we learn, how we improve the way we work with local Indigenous communities. And that was through the creation of the Global Center for Indigenous Community Relations. On the other hand, I think that there's also been a increasing awareness across the broader industry around that originated from investors as well as companies themselves, recognizing the importance of the relationships with Indigenous communities. And so one of the aims of the center is to clearly work outside of Newmont with the broader industry to both learn from what others are doing, but also to share the things that we do well and the things we don't do well with the broader industry. And I think that creates a platform of learning to try and advance the broader industry's approach to build and maintain better relationships with Indigenous communities. There's a need and a desire to try new approaches to learn from best practice, build networks and partnerships, and create capacity in this area. And I think we're really trying to not take a self-centered view of what the center's role is, but improve our own practices, but be very transparent and share with others the things we learn across our own experiences and those of others. Which I think brings us to you, Catherine, which you've been working over the last 8 months on building a strategic plan for what the center will do and how it's going to do its work. So if you could walk us through what's the purpose and the vision of the Global Center for Indigenous Community Relations?
I think the biggest thing that I come back to is the purpose for the Global Center for Indigenous Community Relations is to advocate for excellence in engagement with Indigenous communities, both within Newmont and within the industry. And so there's two components that we're focusing on. The first one is an internal component around sharing best practices across our operations and our projects, and also creating an opportunity for the people at the site level to share their experiences and learn from one another and create a network, if you will, across the company to make sure that we are really learning from what we're seeing globally in this area. And then the second component to that is an external facing group. So we're looking at how we can host or participate in a wider dialogue between the industry and between Indigenous communities. We've had some experience with this at Newmont, being part of, for example, the FPIC Solutions Dialogue, which is hosted by Resolve, and that we've seen has been such a rich opportunity to speak frankly and to share knowledge and to build some capacity. So we're really looking for opportunities to create more opportunities for dialogue like that and share knowledge and share capacity across the industry. And our vision is ultimately to become a source of dialogue, a source of knowledge that improves our own practice and improves that of the industry. So I think, you really kind of captured on this in your comments around that it is meant to be honest about where Newmont is at and where we want to go, but also try to contribute to the greater body of knowledge in this area.
So, Catherine, I think you've articulated very nicely the vision and the purpose of the Global Center for Indigenous Community Relations, and having both an internal facing component as well as an external facing component, which I think is an interesting approach. Given that purpose and vision, what are the specific goals for the Global Center for Indigenous Community Relations? What are we trying to achieve?
It's really important that we're clear on where we want to go with this, because I think it's going to take on lots of different forms. So our first and foremost goal with the Global Center is to promote positive and respectful relationships between the resource industry and Indigenous communities. That's what we're trying to go towards. And then the second piece that I think is a really important goal that will support that is building awareness around the value and importance of the relationship between Indigenous communities that host these mining projects and operations in their traditional territories. And so we're trying to create a learning space through that second goal to create that awareness and build knowledge both within the industry and within Newmont. And then the third goal, and I think this one's really critical too, is how can we contribute to building capacity for Indigenous communities who will have resource projects come into their traditional territory? Maybe they've already been interfacing with the resource industry, and how do we make sure that they're ready and prepared to take advantage of some of the shared value creation that would provide, and also be able to represent their views and their perspectives when a mining company comes to their traditional territory. So how can we support them in building capacity? And those three goals of building positive relationships, creating a learning space, and building capacity for Indigenous communities working with the mining industry are what we are all about at the Global Center.